my daughter closed the door on me.
I never thought my own daughter would look at me as if I were a stranger, but that's exactly what happened when I knocked on her door that Tuesday morning. The door, a massive, polished thing of dark wood that seemed to swallow the light, swung open, and there stood Caroline, my only child, her face a mask of polite confusion that chilled me to the bone. It was the same expression she might use for a door-to-door salesman peddling brushes, not for her own mother who had held her hand through chicken pox and heartbreaks. "Mother," she said, her voice cool and distant, like the echo in a cavern. "What are you doing here?" "We're terribly busy." Behind her, in the vast foyer of the house my sacrifices had helped buy, I saw luggage. Not just suitcases, but new gleaming sets of hard-shell luggage, tagged and ready. And my grandson, Liam, barely 10, was zipping up a bag with a logo I'd never seen before, a stylized ship's wheel. My heart, that old tired muscle, gave a painful thud, a trip, a big one, and no one had thought to tell me. That was the first cut, the initial delicate slice of a betrayal that would soon deepen into a wound I feared might never heal. But I am getting ahead of myself. For every epic tragedy, my dear, there is a quiet beginning, a simple melody before the orchestra swells into a storm. And my melody was played in the key of a simple, contented life. My name is Eleanor, though most days I feel more like Nana or Mom. For 72 years, I've navigated this world, first as a daughter, then a wife, a mother, and now a widow. My kingdom is not a marble foyer, but a cozy, slightly cluttered cottage on the other side of town, where the curtains are lace and the air always smells faintly of cinnamon and the bread I bake every Sunday. My wealth is not measured in bank statements, but in the well-worn spines of my books, the vibrancy of my garden, and the quiet peace I've cultivated like a rare flower after my Harold passed. I live on a modest pension, and what Harold left me, which is enough for groceries, utilities, and a little put away each month in a mason jar I keep on the top shelf of the kitchen cupboard. That jar represents dreams, you see. Not grand ones, but small, precious ones. A new set of knitting needles. A donation to the local animal shelter. A birthday gift for Caroline that might be a little more extravagant than usual. Every coin I drop into that glass is a seed of love planted for my family. The contrast between my world and Caroline's could not be starker. Where my home is filled with the soft whispers of memory, hers is a monument to success. Her husband, David, is a man whose handshake is like a financial transaction, and together they've built a life of glossy surfaces and silent, expensive things. I love them, I do, but visiting them is like stepping into a beautifully decorated museum where I'm afraid to touch anything. Still, I went every week without fail, bearing a loaf of warm bread or a jar of my homemade jam, a tether of warmth to their cold, perfect world. I had always been the rock, the foundation. When Harold died, I sold the big family house so Caroline wouldn't have to worry about me and could use the money for a down payment on her own dream home. It was a substantial sum, about $230,000, and I gave it to her with a heart full of love, no formal paperwork, just a mother's trust. "It's yours, sweetheart," I'd said. "Build a beautiful life." I kept only my cottage and my dignity, symbolized by the single strand of pearls my own mother gave me. They are old, the clasp is delicate, but wearing them makes me feel that no matter how humble my circumstances, I come from a line of strong women. The chipped mug I drink my tea from every morning? Harold gave it to me on our first anniversary. It has a small crack, but it holds the heat just right. These are the artifacts of my life, the relics of a love that was real and tangible. But I was beginning to learn that in Caroline's new world, relics were meant to be stored away, forgotten. That Tuesday, standing on her doorstep, I felt the first true tremor of that forgetting. "Busy with what, dear?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my effort to steady it. I held out the warm loaf of banana bread I'd brought, a peace offering, a reminder of who I was. She took it without looking at it, her eyes darting back into the house. "Oh, just things. You know how it is. Did we have plans?" I must have forgotten. We had no plans. But a mother knows. The energy in the house was electric, the kind that buzzes before a great departure. I just wanted to see my favorite people, I said, trying to peer past her. Is Liam around? I finished that sweater I was knitting for him. He's busy, she said too quickly. Maybe next week, Mother. And then, the finality in her tone. We really have to go. The door began to close, a slow, inexorable movement that felt like a guillotine falling on our connection. Just before it shut, I heard my son-in-law David's voice call out from the depths of the house. Caroline, did you confirm the excursion for St. Thomas? And for God's sake, don't forget to transfer the final payment from the joint account. The door clicked shut. I stood there, on the pristine welcome mat that suddenly felt like a border crossing into a foreign land where I had no visa. St. Thomas? A joint account payment? The words hung in the air, poisonously sweet. I felt a cold dread begin to pool in my stomach. It was in that moment, standing alone on the porch, that I remembered the new credit card. Several months ago, Caroline had convinced me to get a new credit card with a higher limit. For emergencies, Mom, she'd said, her voice so full of concern. What if something happens to the cottage? Or you have a medical issue? I'll be a co-signer, so it's no trouble for you. It just gives us peace of mind. She'd handled all the paperwork, her efficient fingers filling out the forms while I poured the tea. The card had arrived in the mail, and I'd given it to her for safekeeping. You keep it, darling, in case you need to help me with something. It was an act of trust, the kind that forms the bedrock of a family, a mother's trust. I walked back to my old sedan, the banana bread sitting heavy on the passenger seat. The world outside my windshield seemed unchanged, the same manicured lawns, the same blue sky, but inside, everything had shifted. A terrible, nagging suspicion began to uncoil within me. What if the emergency wasn't mine? What if the peace of mind was only for them? I drove home in a daze, the familiar streets seeming alien. When I got inside, the comfort of my cottage felt like a mockery. The ticking of the grandfather clock was too loud, the silence too profound. I needed to know. I went to my small, tidy desk and pulled out my files. I kept copies of everything, a habit from a lifetime of careful budgeting. There, in a folder marked Credit, was the information for the new account. With trembling fingers, I logged into the banking portal on my ancient computer. The screen glowed, a window into a truth I was not sure I was ready to face. The page loaded slowly, each passing second a lifetime. And then it appeared, the account summary. The balance took my breath away. Not a small charge for groceries or a utility bill. A single staggering transaction from 2 days prior, made online. A payment to Royal Caribbean International. The amount was just over $15,000. The numbers blurred before my eyes. $15,000. For a cruise. A cruise to St. Thomas. A cruise my daughter had just told me she was too busy to even speak to me about. I sat back in my chair, the wooden creak a sound of protest. The room seemed to spin. This was not neglect. This was not simple forgetfulness. This was theft. This was a calculated, cold-hearted betrayal. They were going on a family vacation, a lavish one, and they had used my money, my credit, to pay for it. And they had not even had the decency to invite me. The pain was so acute it was physical, a sharp ache in my chest. I thought of the mason jar on the shelf, each coin a sacrifice. I thought of the pearls in my jewelry box, a symbol of a grace they had clearly forgotten. I felt the weight of my love for them, a love that had always been my compass, and I felt it twist into something else. Something dark and unfamiliar? But what could I do? I was just an old woman in a cottage. They were my family. To confront them would be to shatter what little remained. Yet to stay silent was to accept this humiliation, to become a mere bank account in their eyes. I was trapped between the woman I was, a forgiving mother, and the woman this betrayal was forcing me to become. A few days later, clinging to a fragile hope that there had been some mistake, some misunderstanding, I called Caroline. The phone rang and rang before finally going to voicemail. I tried again later, same result. Desperation, that cunning foe, led me to drive back to her house. The place was dark, silent. No cars in the driveway. On a whim, I went to the side gate which led to the backyard. It was unlocked. I slipped through, feeling like a trespasser in my own daughter's life. The backyard was impeccably landscaped, empty. But then I saw it, lying on the patio table near the grill, as if discarded in a hurry, a glossy, full-color brochure. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was for a 7-day Caribbean cruise on the Symphony of the Seas. On the front, in Carolyn's elegant script, was a note, "Itinerary for the Thompson family adventure. Departs April 10th, April 10th. Today was April 9th. They were leaving tomorrow." And as I stood there, holding the evidence of their joy, a joy from which I was so pointedly excluded, I noticed something else tucked under the brochure. It was a smaller piece of paper, a printout of a passenger manifest. My eyes scanned the list of names: David Thompson, Caroline Thompson, Liam Thompson. And then, at the bottom, a name that struck me like a physical blow: Chloe Thompson. Chloe? Who was Chloe? I had no granddaughter named Chloe. The name meant nothing to me, yet there it was, included as part of the family. A stranger was going on this trip funded by my credit card, while I, the grandmother, the matriarch, was left behind to water her plants and wonder. I felt the world tilt on its axis. This was no longer just about money or exclusion. This was something deeper, more sinister. It was as if I were being erased, my place taken by a phantom. The betrayal was not just financial. It was existential. I stood there in the gathering twilight, the brochure in my hand, and I felt the last vestiges of my passive acceptance crumble away. The storm of injustice had been brewing for years in subtle slights and cold silences, and now it had broken overhead. But a storm, my dears, can also cleanse. It can wash away the old and make room for the new. And as I walked back to my car, a strange calm settled over me. I was not just a victim. I was a woman with a long memory, a deep well of patience, and a sudden, clear understanding of the game that was being played. They thought I was weak. They thought I was ignorant. They thought I would simply fade away without a fight. They were wrong. For what is the heart of a grandmother but a fortress of love? And when that love is betrayed, it does not collapse. It transforms, its walls hardening into resolve, its warmth channeled into a fire that can burn away falsehood. I returned to my cottage, not with a sob, but with a plan beginning to form in the quiet corners of my mind. The first move had been theirs. The second, I knew with a chilling certainty, would be mine. The curtain was rising on a drama they never expected, and I, Eleanor, was preparing to step onto the stage. And so, the first act of our little tragedy closes. But remember, the deepest cuts are not always made with a knife. Sometimes they are delivered with a closed door and a silent phone. And the most potent revenge is not born of rage, but of a heart that has learned, finally, to fight for itself. The silence in my cottage had changed. No longer was it a comfortable blanket woven from years of contentment. It had become an accusatory presence, a witness to my humiliation. I sat at my kitchen table, the cruise brochure and passenger manifest spread before me like evidence in a trial I never knew I was facing. The name Chloe Thompson seemed to pulse on the page, a cryptic glyph that held the key to my entire family's betrayal. Who was she? A cousin? A friend? But the surname, Thompson. That was the knife twist. She was included as family, while I was exiled. My first instinct, the mother's instinct, was to rationalize. Perhaps it was a mistake, a clerical error. But the cold, calculating part of me that had been awakened knew better. The pieces were there. The closed door, the hushed urgency, the staggering charge on my credit card. This was not an error. It was a design. And I, Eleanor, had been naive enough to believe my love was a shield against such avarice. There is a particular agony in realizing that the sanctuary you have built with your own 2 hands, a sanctuary of memory and sacrifice, has been viewed by others not as a home, but as a resource to be plundered. I had to know more. I had to understand the depth of the chasm that had opened between my daughter and me. With a resolve that felt foreign yet fiercely familiar, like an old sword being drawn from its scabbard after decades of peace, I decided to investigate. They were away, sailing toward tropical sunsets on my dime. Their house would be empty, and I, the forgotten matriarch, still held a key. The following morning, I drove to their neighborhood once more, but this time, I did not park in the driveway. I left my car around the corner and approached on foot, feeling like a ghost in my own life. The house loomed, silent and imposing. My key turned in the lock with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. Stepping inside was like entering a tomb dedicated to a life I had helped create, but from which I was now barred. The air was stale, the grandeur feeling hollow without the noise of living. I moved through the rooms, my heart aching at the familiar photographs on the walls, images of Liam, of Caroline as a child, even a few of Harold and me, now seeming like artifacts from a forgotten dynasty. I pushed the sentiment aside. This was not a time for mourning. It was a time for truth. I made my way to David's home office, a room I had always found cold and impersonal, dominated by a large mahogany desk. I began with the desk drawers. They were locked, but I remembered a small key Caroline kept in a ceramic bowl on the mantelpiece. It was still there. The first drawer contained neat files, taxes, insurance policies, investment portfolios. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. And then I found it, a file labeled Estate Planning. Inside, nestled among cold legal documents, was a last will and testament for David and Caroline Thompson, dated just 3 months prior. My eyes, still sharp despite their age, scanned the dense text. And there it was, in black and white. The beneficiary for their entire estate, in the event of their simultaneous deaths, was not me, as we had casually discussed years ago, but a legal trust for Liam, with David's brother, Robert, named as executor, and the contingent beneficiary, should anything happen to Liam before he reached maturity, was listed as Chloe Thompson, beloved niece. I sank into the leather chair, the document feeling like lead in my hands. Beloved niece. I was not even a contingency. I had been erased, surgically and deliberately, from the future of the family I had built. The will was a silent, legal confirmation of what I had felt on the doorstep. I was obsolete. But this was more than neglect. It was a premeditated dismissal of my very existence. The room seemed to spin, and I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. The foundations of my world were not just cracking. They had been demolished with my own ignorant consent. But the truth, like a stubborn weed, pushes through even the most carefully laid pavement. As I sat there reeling, my gaze fell upon David's computer. It was off. I am no expert with technology, but I knew Caroline often left her laptop in the kitchen. I went downstairs, my legs feeling like wood. Her sleek silver laptop was on the counter, charging. I opened it. It prompted for a password. I tried Liam's birthday. Incorrect. I tried their wedding anniversary. Incorrect. And then, on a whim, I typed in the name of our old dog, Baxter, who had died when Caroline was 15. The screen unlocked, my breath caught. It was a small victory, a nod to a past she had not entirely forgotten. I opened her email. My eyes, unaccustomed to the bright screen, scanned the inbox. There were dozens of emails about the cruise, confirmations, excursion bookings, spa reservations. And then I saw an email chain with the subject, Mother's Finances. The blood drained from my face. I clicked on it. The emails were between Caroline and David, sent over the past several months. They discussed my diminishing capacity and financial irresponsibility. They spoke of needing to protect her assets and secure Liam's future. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read David's words. We need to get the durable power of attorney signed before she does something foolish. The cruise funds are just the start. We need full control, Caroline had replied. I know. It's for the best. She'll never understand. We'll have Robert draw up the papers. We can tell her it's for her own good. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. They were plotting to legally strip me of my autonomy, using the very money they had stolen from me as justification. They saw my trust as senility, my love as a weakness to be exploited. I felt a hot wave of shame and anger wash over me. This was the deepest betrayal yet, not just of my wallet, but of my mind, my spirit, my very right to self-determination. I needed air. I stumbled out into the backyard, clutching the printouts I had made, the papers fluttering in my hands like guilty secrets. I stood on the patio where I had found the brochure, the scene of the crime, and that's when I saw it again, the patio table. Something glinted beneath it, a smartphone. It must have fallen out of someone's pocket in the rush to leave. It was Caroline's old phone, the one she said she used for work. The screen was cracked, but it had a charge, and it was unlocked. Fate, it seems, delivers its proofs in the most mundane of packages. I picked up the phone. The message icon showed notifications. I tapped it. There were texts from a group chat titled Family Cruise Fun. The participants were David, Caroline, and Robert. I scrolled up, my heart in my throat. The messages were full of excitement about the trip. And then I saw it. A text from David, sent the day after I had been turned away at the door. Don't worry, Caro. Once we get the POA signed, we can move the rest of the money from her accounts. The cottage is worth a fortune now. We'll sell it, put her in a nice home. She'll be comfortable, and we'll finally be free of the burden. Chloe will be a better grandmother to Liam anyway. She's young, energetic, not stuck in the past. The words free of the burden struck me with the force of a physical blow. I was a burden. My love, my sacrifices, my very existence was a weight to be shed. And Chloe, she was not just a niece. She was my intended replacement. A younger, shinier model brought in to grandmother my own grandson. The sheer audacity of it, the cruelty, was so profound it felt almost theatrical. This was no simple family squabble. This was a conspiracy of the heart. I stood there, frozen, the phone in my hand feeling like a live grenade. The evidence was now undeniable, a tapestry of betrayal woven from legal documents, stolen money, and callous text messages. The woman I had raised, the child I had sung to sleep, had become a stranger capable of this profound cruelty. The love I had felt for her began to curdle into something else, something hard and sharp and dangerous. The time for passive hurt was over. The time for tears had passed. They had not just stolen my money, they had stolen my dignity, and that was a treasure I would fight to reclaim. I returned to my cottage, not as a broken victim, but as a general returning to her map room. The pieces were all laid out before me. I had the credit card statement, the will, the printed emails, and now Caroline's phone with its damning texts. I had the truth. But truth alone is not a weapon. It is merely the ore from which a weapon is forged. I needed a plan that would not simply expose them, but that would deliver a justice as poetic and proportionate as their crime had been calculated and cold. I thought of my mason jar, the jar of sacrifice. I thought of my pearls, the symbol of a dignity they thought they could strip from me. And I thought of the Count of Monte Cristo, a story Harold had loved. He had not wreaked his revenge with brute force, but with patience, intelligence, and an intimate understanding of his enemies' weaknesses. I would do the same. I would use their own greed, their own carefully constructed facade of perfection, against them. They were on a cruise, surrounded by luxury they had not earned. They felt secure, untouchable. But the ocean has a way of isolating people, of cutting them off from the world. And I had an idea, a first step that would shake their paradise to its core. I sat down at my own small desk, the phone beside me. I knew what I had to do. It was time to make a phone call. Not a call of confrontation, but a call of strategic alliance. I scrolled through the contacts on Caroline's phone until I found the number I was looking for. Robert, the brother, the executor. The one who had drawn up the papers to disinherit me. He was their accomplice, but perhaps he was also a weak link. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the call button. The game was about to begin, but I never could have predicted the voice that answered, or the shocking revelation that would come from that single, fateful call. The phone rang only once before a voice answered, but it was not the brisk, officious tone of Robert I expected. Instead, a woman's voice, young and slightly anxious, came through the line. "Hello, Aunt Caroline? Is everything okay?" I froze, my plan evaporating in an instant. "Aunt Caroline?" This was not Robert's number. I had misdialed in my agitation, but the woman had called Caroline Aunt. A cold dread trickled down my spine. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice strained. "Who is this?" "This is Chloe," the voice replied, and I felt the world tilt. Chloe, the phantom beneficiary, the replacement grandmother. I thought this was Caroline's phone. Who is this? My mind raced. This was not part of any plan. This was fate throwing a wild card onto the table. I could have hung up, but something in her voice, a note of genuine concern, or perhaps just curiosity, made me pause. I took a steadying breath. "Chloe," I said, my tone softening into the grandmotherly cadence I knew so well. "This is Eleanor, Caroline's mother." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, so profound I could hear the faint static of the connection. "Eleanor?" she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. But they said you were, I thought, she trailed off, confusion evident. What did they tell you, child? I asked, my heart pounding. What did they say about me? Another pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was laced with a dawning horror. They said you were unwell, that you had early dementia and couldn't be around family anymore, that it was too stressful for you. David said you'd signed over financial control to them and wanted to be left in peace. Her words came out in a rush, and I could picture her, this young woman, her face pale as the lies unraveled before her. They invited me on the cruise to help with Liam, to be a sort of support for him since you couldn't be. The audacity of their deception took my breath away. They had not only stolen from me, but had painted me as a feeble-minded recluse to justify their actions to an outsider. And they had used this young woman, perhaps even manipulated her kindness. I felt a surge of anger, but it was tempered by a sudden pity for Chloe. She was a pawn in their game, just as I had been. Chloe, I said, my voice gentle but firm. None of that is true. I am in my right mind, and I am very much not at peace. They are on that cruise using a credit card they took out in my name without my knowledge. They charged $15,000 to it. I heard her sharp intake of breath. What? But they told me they'd had a windfall from an investment. They said it was a celebration. The only investment was their investment in a lie, I replied. I knew I was taking a risk, trusting this stranger, but the truth has a power all its own. I needed an ally, and sometimes they appear in the most unexpected places. Chloe, I have evidence. Legal documents, emails, text messages. They have cut me out of their will and plan to sell my home. I proceeded to tell her everything. The closed door, the brochure, the will, the damning texts about being a burden. I spoke not with hysterics, but with the measured sadness of a woman recounting a great tragedy. I could hear her listening, her occasional gasp or murmur of disbelief, confirming that she was hearing this for the first time. She was not a villain. She was another victim of their deceit. When I finished, there was another long silence. Then she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I had no idea. I lost my own parents last year. David and Caroline were so kind to me, they said I was like family. I thought I was helping. She took a deep breath. What can I do? And so, an alliance was forged, not in blood, but in shared betrayal. Chloe was on the cruise with them, a witness behind enemy lines. She became my eyes and ears. Over the next few days, as their ship sailed through sapphire waters, our secret communications began. She would text me from her own phone discreetly, telling me about their activities, their conversations. She confirmed that they were indeed using my credit card for everything from expensive drinks to shore excursions, all while laughing about how free they felt. Chloe, playing her part, began to gently question things, expressing concern about the source of their sudden wealth, subtly planting seeds of doubt that would later grow into mighty oaks of suspicion. Meanwhile, back in my cottage, I was not idle. The time for mere discovery was over. Now was the time for action. I gathered all my evidence, the printed emails, the photos of the will, the screenshots of the text messages, and I made an appointment with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a fierce woman named Ms. Sharma, who specialized in elder law and financial abuse. I walked into her office on April 14th, my head held high, my pearls around my neck. I laid out the entire sordid tale before her. Ms. Sharma listened intently, her eyes narrowing as I showed her the documents. This is a clear case of fraud and undue influence, Eleanor, she said, her voice crisp and professional. The credit card charge is straightforward theft. The durable power of attorney they were planning to have you sign would have been illegal under these circumstances, obtained through deception. We can stop this, and so we began. Our first move was tactical. Ms. Sharma helped me file a fraud report with the credit card company. The $15,000 charge was frozen, pending investigation. Then, we sent a formal, registered letter to David and Caroline's home, addressed to Robert as well, stating that I was aware of their actions and had retained legal counsel. We did not send it to the ship. We wanted it waiting for them like a time bomb upon their return. But the masterstroke was yet to come. Ms. Sharma suggested we use their own weapons against them. We discovered that David, in his arrogance, had listed my cottage as a potential asset in some of his financial projections. Using this, we filed a lien on the property in my name, asserting my ownership and preventing any future sale without my consent. It was a defensive move, but it felt like raising a flag on a fortress I had reclaimed. The days passed. Chloe reported that the mood on the cruise had shifted. The credit card had been declined at a jewelry store in St. Thomas, causing a scene of embarrassment. David was furious, scrambling to use his own funds. Caroline had become withdrawn, nervous. The paradise they had built on my sacrifice was showing cracks. Chloe, my reluctant agent, fed their paranoia with innocent questions. "David, are you sure everything is all right with Aunt Eleanor? I had a strange dream about her. She told me that Caroline had begun to drink more, her laughter forced, while David's boasts about his financial acumen had ceased altogether." The final piece of my plan fell into place when I remembered the mason jar, the jar of sacrifice. I took it down from the shelf, the coins and few bills inside clinking softly. It wasn't much, but it was pure, untainted by their greed. I used it to retain Ms. Sharma fully, a symbolic act of using my own honest savings to fight their dishonest wealth. They returned from their cruise on April 18th, sun-kissed but hollow-eyed. The letter from Ms. Sharma was the first thing they saw. Chloe, who had played her part flawlessly, said her goodbyes quickly, telling them she needed to return home early, but not before looking Caroline in the eye and saying, "You should call your mother. I think she needs you." The confusion and fear on my daughter's face, as described by Chloe, was the first taste of the poetic justice I had craved. The confrontation did not happen immediately. They avoided me for 2 days, no doubt consulting with Robert, trying to devise a new strategy. But on the 3rd day they appeared at my cottage. I was waiting for them. I had baked a loaf of bread, a habit of peace, but this time it felt like a declaration of war. I answered the door, my posture straight, my gaze steady. "Mother," Caroline began, her voice trembling, "we need to talk. There have been some terrible misunderstandings." I ushered them into my living room. David would not meet my eyes. "Sit down," I said, my voice calm. I did not offer tea. "There is no misunderstanding, Caroline. There is only the truth." I had laid out the evidence on my coffee table like a prosecutor presenting a case. The credit card statement circled in red, the printouts of the emails, the photo of the will clause, the text message about being a burden. I watched as their faces crumbled. Caroline began to cry, not the performative tears of a child caught, but the deep, shuddering sobs of a woman whose carefully constructed world was imploding. David tried to bluster, to talk about estate planning and protecting the family, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. "You have stolen from me," I said, my voice low but clear. "You have lied about me. You have tried to erase me, but I am still here." I told them about the fraud report, the lien on the cottage, and my lawyer. I told them that Chloe now knew the truth. The humiliation was complete, but this was not about crushing them. That is the mistake of the vengeful soul. It seeks to destroy, but true justice seeks to restore balance. I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her, and I saw not a monster, but a woman who had lost her way, seduced by wealth and a hunger for a life without complications. "I will not press criminal charges," I said. They both looked up, stunned. "But on one condition. You will sign a legally binding document prepared by Ms. Sharma, repaying every cent of the cruise money with interest. You will formally reinstate me in your wills, and you will both enter family counseling with me. We will either rebuild this family from the ashes of your betrayal, or we will learn to live with the distance between us. But the deceit ends today." The silence that followed was heavier than any that had come before. It was the sound of shame and the faint, fragile whisper of hope. They agreed. There was no other choice. In the weeks that followed, the money was repaid. The legal documents were signed. The first counseling session was awkward and painful, but it was a start. Liam began visiting me again, his sweet, uncomplicated love a balm on my wounded heart. He never knew the details, only that his grandmother was back in his life. The mason jar sits on my shelf once more, slowly filling again with coins of hope. My pearls remain around my neck, a symbol of a dignity that was tested but never broken. The chipped mug still holds my morning tea, a reminder of a love that endured. I learned that justice is not always about punishment. It is about truth. And truth, like a seed planted in dark soil, will always push its way toward the light. They thought they could sail away from their problems, but problems have a way of following you, especially when they are rooted in a mother's heart. My dear friends, if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Do not mistake kindness for weakness. Do not silence your voice for the comfort of others. And never ever underestimate the power of a grandmother who has been wronged. For we are the keepers of the stories, the weavers of the family tapestry, and if you pull too hard on our threads, the entire design may unravel in ways you never expected. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to find their courage today. And perhaps subscribe to this channel. This old heart has many more truths to tell, and I believe we all have a little more learning to do together. Thank you for listening.